Hi, AJ Mahari here. If you are somebody who's been with a borderline, untreated, have you ever realized that among all the other things that you've gone through, that you've been scapegoated to? How does the borderline scapegoat you? What is borderline scapegoating? Because this happens in families of origin, borderlines and narcissists, and etc. But in a significant other relationship, how does a borderline scapegoat you? And what does that mean? Everybody who's been with somebody with untreated BPD, and if you've ever been devalued, then you would know, or you'd think that you'd be aware, some people aren't aware yet, that you've been scapegoated. What do I mean? Well, because scapegoating is when someone else blames you for what they've done because they can't take personal responsibility or because they can't deal with their own feelings. Scapegoats are blamed by others, and then people that are scapegoated, especially in family of origin, but even if you're scapegoated by an ex or somebody with BPD, any relationship type, or narcissist, when you're scapegoated, you're blamed, and they obfuscate their personal responsibility, and then it becomes like an urban legend. So an urban legend in a family of origin, but even in a significant other relationship, because with, there's some exceptions, not all people with BPD are in the same place, they're not all exactly the same, but when they split you to devaluation, it's all your fault. So they believe, so they think. So they are scapegoating you right there. And if you've been in a relationship with someone with BPD and you're the ex right now and you have codependency and you're learning a lot, or you might even think you know it all right now, right? Like, because you're an expert on BPD. Well, let's say you have some expertise in knowing about BPD or learning about BPD. Good for you. How's it going to help you in your codependency recovery, right? So people get scapegoated. I know what that's like in family of origin. I think I know what that's like when I was in that relationship with the cluster B, the BPD, NPD alcoholic, 2004 to 2006. In that relationship, and the scapegoating was pretty thick. So I wonder sometimes if people mix up borderline scapegoating as being people with BPD gaslighting like narcissists, because people with BPD really don't gaslight like narcissists. Why would that be? Kind of because BPD isn't a form of NPD. Anybody who says that just doesn't know what they're talking about. So yeah, you get blamed, that's scapegoating, more than it even is, quote, gaslighting, unquote, with a borderline. Because they're not that organized. Like a narcissist has more profound, more incredibly strong defense mechanisms than a person with BPD does. So people with BPD aren't failed narcissists either, by the way. So if you're becoming some kind of expert or quasi-expert and you think you know everything about BPD now, or the more whatever, like somebody in the channel left a comment recently, like to somebody had said just run from them. I can't remember what video it was on my channel, but like, so the person that said just run from them, whatever, there's lots of comments like that across the channel over the years. But then a person recently commented to that comment and said, that's a really childish, I'm paraphrasing, point of view to the person that said just run. Because they said you can learn a lot more about BPD and you can understand it and you can read books and everything. And I'm like, where's this person coming from, I wonder? Extreme severe codependency, perhaps? Because you know what a lot of people with codependency need to know more about, never mind is the BPD, NPD, BPD is not a form of NPD, BPD is not the same as NPD, borderlines don't gaslight like narcissists, but they are scapegoating you, and that's what you're experiencing. And after scapegoating, often comes the legendary stuff of lies, right, that they believe. Lies that you're the one that did this and you're the one that did that, which might involve some projection, yes, but what they're doing is scapegoating you. It's interesting because whenever I try to talk about this in a live stream or anything to do with scapegoating or how I was a scapegoat in my narcissistic dysfunctional family of origin, which I'd like to talk more about, like to do more, on NPD, family of origin, for people with codependency who are still focused on the significant other relationship because you haven't yet got deeper or gone into your healing recovery process to realize that the trauma bond between the codependent and the borderline isn't, for most people with codependency, it's not your first trauma bond, and that it all has the underpinnings of trauma. But do you know that more than gaslighting like narcissists do, borderlines are scapegoating in their own unique patterned ways? And it's all out of unconscious defense mechanisms, repetition compulsion cycles of trying to escape their own pain and emotional dysregulation when triggered because they don't know why they're feeling what they're feeling, as I've said in other videos. So then they end up externalizing that out on the person closest, right? So significant other, favorite person, sibling, child, parent, whatever the case. So scapegoating is a really big deal. And people with codependency can also scapegoat. So blaming anyone, like there's a narrative with a lot of people with codependency, everything's the borderline's fault. Well, that's you scapegoating the borderline. So what you need to do is, first of all, it's healthier to shift your focus away from the person with BPD. But what you really need to do is the person with BPD is responsible for what they do, especially any abuse or what have you. But they're not responsible for why the whole relationship doesn't work, believe it or not. Because people with codependency are right in there with their own unhealthy relational style, their own repetition compulsion cycles of externalizing things out to get needs met. And none of that, I'm not saying this is conscious. This is where the trauma bond comes in, and the trauma bond is about trauma, not addiction. And people with BPD can't be compared to alcoholics, because even if a person with BPD is an alcoholic, then they're a person with BPD who's alcoholic. Being an alcoholic isn't the same as being a borderline, and being a codependent isn't the same, but overlaps. And so it's not only borderlines that scapegoat codependents. Codependents also scapegoat borderlines, because scapegoating is about blaming someone else for something that you might have something to do with, or that you might have done. And people with codependency do this a lot, because they're trying to escape the reality. If you've been victimized by a borderline, why wouldn't you feel a little bit victimized? That word has been, I guess, bastardized, right? Because people that are victimized, when you're still in that trauma, when you haven't healed and recovered from that trauma, when you haven't gone to therapy yet, then yeah, you could be a victim too. It's not just people with BPD that feel like victims. They often feel like victims if they're untreated because they were victimized in childhood. So they don't outgrow that mindset, right? So the key thing is that borderline scapegoat. They're scapegoating more than they're gaslighting. Narcissists gaslight and scapegoat. Might seem like a really fine delineation of something that in your experience you're like, what's the difference? Who cares? And a lot of people take that attitude, and everybody has the right to think whatever they want. But it might help you to understand scapegoating. It might help you, I guess it might have helped people earlier in the relationship. So I don't know if anybody finds this video who's still in a relationship with someone with BPD. But then they're probably still in a really thick denial place. The borderline scapegoats you by the very nature of how they blame you. And then you as a codependent, because most people with codependency at one point or another, one way or another, for one reason or many reasons or other, was scapegoated in childhood. And so that's going to trigger people with codependency big time to the point where you might not even recognize that you're being scapegoated, because maybe you didn't know what that was when you were a child. So borderline scapegoating is more to the point what's happening for so many people that think they're being gaslit. But the other thing that people with codependency have to think more about is once you're being treated terribly, abused and traumatized, well, you're in a trauma bond, fair enough, and you didn't know that. You might not know that yet. But wherever you are in understanding what's going on, or if you're still in the relationship, etc., or if you still have hope it'll work out and they're untreated, well, guess what? You're untreated too. So I'm not here to say borderlines and codependents are the same. There's a dynamic with the trauma bond wherein it's not all the borderline and never the codependent. And I'm not saying that the codependent does what the borderline does in most of these trauma bonded dynamic of relationships at all. But how many people really know that they're being scapegoated by the borderline, who's been scapegoated likely in childhood, as has the codependent? And then people with codependency who are still running away from their pain by all kinds of different things that they'll say in live streams, topics they'll change. People don't usually follow topics. I mean, not all people. Many people never follow a topic on a live stream. They just jump in and take it somewhere else, and that's something I'm not going to have anything to do with anymore. When you're blamed by the borderline, when they project out and something that they're not consciously aware of, and they project onto you, so when that first happens, you don't know why, you don't know what's going on, it hurts, okay. Then you try to reason with them, but let me just say to people with codependency, you don't own the lion's share of reasoning necessarily, because even if you are very logical and you can reason really well, then you're probably not noticing the whole emotional landscape component of what's happening in the trauma bond dynamics between you and a borderline if you're the codependent. So this idea that borderlines are professional victims is rather a stigmatizing thing, but it's also a scapegoating thing. That people who've been traumatized, maybe your life was turned upside down, you were devastated by somebody with BPD, but you had to be there. I know you didn't get there knowingly, more people than not don't, but then you stayed too long. And that's the trauma bond, and that's the codependency. And so you've been scapegoated by a borderline, people with codependency scapegoat also, and a family of origin systems and scapegoating that contributes to codependency is part of the work that I do with clients, and I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you. And it might not resonate with anybody from the last live stream because it just went all over the place. And I'm not really here to listen to things that I don't cover on this channel that go all over the place when people are into logical fallacies, false equivalencies, and reductionist, not even, like in a debate kind of thing, reductionist arguments. And then they tell me how educated they are and etc. when we're talking about God knows what by that point. Codependents can scapegoat too. So anyway, borderline scapegoating in general, people with codependency scapegoat as well. Anybody who doesn't have the emotional maturity and hasn't fully emotionally adulted, that includes people with codependency who haven't gone through therapy yet. That includes people with BPD who haven't gone through therapy. Of course, it's a given for narcissists, right? They have no emotional intelligence, basically. These are trauma bonds, and everybody gets hurt, and I'm not saying it's 50-50 who's abusing whom, but so many people, even right now, watching my videos and maybe other people's whatever, and you know already what you're up against, and you know what you're involved in, and you know it's a trauma bond, but you still are missing them, and you still want them back. Because the question, so along with the fact of have you ever heard of or have you realized how scapegoated you can be by a borderline, that as a codependent you could be scapegoating a borderline to keep focusing on them some more, to keep abandoning yourself, maybe not so consciously, but you're not focusing on yourself if you're not getting into therapy to do your own healing and recovery work, which you need to do or would benefit you to do to have a better quality of life, let alone healthier relationships. And a healthier relationship to and with yourself, most importantly. So with this borderline scapegoating, there's codependent scapegoating. And then we see it all over the internet. And the fact is it's harder for people. I don't know. Lots of people with BPD are taking personal responsibility, are becoming more aware because they're working in therapy. But there's a whole lot that aren't. And nobody knows what percent is what percent. Dependents who think it's just the borderline that's the problem. Well, they may be seemingly to you the biggest problem in the relationship. They may be the biggest problem in the relationship for themselves. But then there's the reality of if you're an untreated codependent, even if you're with somebody who's been treated a lot, significantly with BPD, chances are they won't choose you if you're an untreated codependent. So borderline scapegoating leads to codependent scapegoating, leads to borderline scapegoating, and around it goes. And that's just but one dynamic that exists in the trauma-bonded relationships, that people with codependency, even after a long time in the relationship and knowing now that you're in a trauma bond, and knowing now that you have codependency, and understanding, never mind what all you might understand about BPD, understand this. They need between 8 to 16 years of therapy. They have to be engaging it. They have to be in the right treatment modality, which is not just DBT. DBT is a good place to start, but a psychodynamic modality for BPD recovery. And that's going to take them 8 to 16 years. You don't have that kind of time to invest in a failed, broken, traumatic relationship in which you were fighting for love. People with codependency. It's time for people with codependency to realize, not taking away from what a borderline has done to you, how they've affected you, how they've traumatized you, but they're re-traumatizing you because you were carrying trauma already from childhood. You wouldn't have codependency. So codependent responsibility and stopping codependent scapegoating, getting into therapy to break that trauma bond and get to know yourself fully, and find out the origin in your family of origin of your codependency, is your way forward. That's keeping it real to help you heal. And also saying to codependents, you need to take your own responsibility. Stop trying to externalize that out onto the borderline so you can actually get what you need that you didn't get in childhood, because you're going to get what you need in therapy. And then you're going to become an independent person who's emotionally adulted. Because people with codependency have not emotionally adulted. Maybe a little more so than borderlines, but not to the degree of what a healthy independent person who's done all this healing recovery work and adulted knows what it means to be an adult. So take care.